Last week, I released my top 10 legendary event characters in Tacticus, and as expected, quite a few of you immediately told me I was wrong. But what surprised me was just how much good discussion there was within the community about it. And so I wanted to do something I don't normally do, which was make a proper community feedback video based on what you've told me. I normally make the list, defend my questionable decisions, and then quietly pretend I don't see all the comments telling me I've lost my mind. But this time I thought the discussion was genuinely worth coming back to. So I've gone through all your comments, looked at the characters you thought I missed, checked the arguments you made for them, and then gone back through their abilities and relics to see how much I actually agree with you. And one important point before we start, this isn't just a vote. Some characters were mentioned more than others, but I've also looked at why you nominated them, and a detailed argument about how somebody performs in the latter stages of a legendary event carries a little bit more weight with me than just shouting Angrax. Although to be fair, there was of course quite a lot of that. So these are my top 10 characters that you think I missed. And by the time we get to number 1, there's one character where I've basically got to admit you were right. So let's start with number 10. At number 10, Karn. And this one immediately surprised a few people. One comment basically asking how I could possibly put Carrion at number 10 while not even including Karn. And another argued that his sheer destructive power was worth dropping Tyrant Guard for. I understand the argument. Karn's built to kill things. His basic melee attack is 4 hits at eviscerating damage, and the Betrayer gives him another attack after his normal attack, dealing another 4 hits of eviscerating damage into an adjacent enemy. So there's bodies all around him, and Karn can tear through them with ridiculous speed. And Blessings of Khorne rewards exactly what you're already trying to do, with his damage increasing as units die in melee during battle. But the only reason I have it at number 10 is that the legendary events are not purely about killing power. The further you go, the more I value characters who can heal, summon, protect the team, resurrect, or just refuse to die. Karn doesn't really solve those problems. He solves the problems standing directly in front of them, and usually by hitting it with an axe repeatedly. So I absolutely agree he deserves a mention. And so let's stick him in as your number 10. Number 9 is one I really didn't expect to be talking about, Gibba Scraps. And importantly, we're talking about Gibba with his relic. One of you put him easily inside the top 12, and another described a properly built mythic Gibba as an almost worse like Aleph Null, which sounds like an insult until you remember that Aleph Null's number 4 in my original list. And so the relic's really what changes things here. It allows Gibba Scraps to be healed as well as repaired, while also reducing critical damage he receives based on adjacent enemies. That is extremely relevant in a legendary event, because suddenly he can operate in more sustained setups instead of being completely dependent on mechanical repair. And then you've got his Grot Tank. It gives you another chunky mechanical body to absorb attacks, deal damage, and generally make the enemy's life more difficult. And that's what I like about Gibba here. He isn't spectacular in one single category. He gives you durability, repair, a summon, another target for the enemy, and now with a relic, significantly more sustainable flexibility. I still think Aleph's is considerably better, but Gibba Scraps at 9, you've convinced me. Number 8 is probably the biggest gamble on this list. It's Caesar. And this isn't really the community saying we've got years of evidence that Caesar's amazing. This is the community saying, have you looked at this guy? Because I have. Caesar is Deep Strike, Rapid Assault, and Terminator Armor, which is already a really interesting package for legendary events, but Red Rampage is the part that really jumps out to me, because after he moves, he deals 2 hits of power damage to every adjacent enemy. If he doesn't move, it triggers at the end of his turn instead, and that's exactly the type of ability that becomes interesting when a legendary event starts surrounding you with bodies. His active also has some built-in sustain. If he's at or below half health when he uses it, he regenerates health afterwards. So you have damage, AoE, armor, and some self-sustain. And personally, I'm already leveling him towards Diamond 3 because I want to see exactly what he can do. We got a little taste of it in his quest this week, and I'm looking forward to seeing how he actually comes into legendary events. Obviously, I haven't used him in a legendary event yet, and that's why I don't really want to put him too much higher than this, but he's definitely a speculative pick, and I think there's a good chance that if we revisit this list in future, 8's going to look a little bit too low for him. And in the meantime, if you want to earn some free Blackstone to help you on your way, you can use my Referral Code in-game today to get 100 free Blackstone. Just note, you can only use one Referral Code, so make sure you make the most of it. At number 7, it's Aesoth, and this one created a really interesting argument in the comments. Some of you said, why use Tyrant Guard when you can use Aesoth? And I don't completely agree with that, but I do understand it. Azoth's active can hit 2 adjacent enemies, stun both for a round, and give Azoth damage reduction for the round as well. And unlike most active abilities, it's not one and done. It has a 2-round cooldown and it can be used again, and that's excellent in a long legendary event battle. And then you've got Stange Vigil, giving surrounding allies additional armor and improving the damage of attacks that aren't normal attacks. And there's additional Custodes interactions in there as well. So Azoth protects, contributes offensively, brings crowd control, and gets to reuse his active. However, I still don't agree that he outright replaces Tyrant Guard. And one of you made exactly the counter argument I would make. Azoth is given armor. Tyrant Guard is reducing income damage with a flat reduction, so high piercing doesn't undermine that protection in the same way. And so I still prefer Tyrant Guard as a pure defensive character, but Azoth does a lot more beside defending, and so number 7 on your list probably feels about right. At number 6, it's Baldur, and this was another character where I openly admitted in the comments that I simply haven't spent enough time with him yet, but after looking more closely at his kit, particularly with his relic, okay, I do understand this one. Baldur can already heal, and when he uses that heal, the target also gains increased critical chance and crit damage for 2 rounds, so his healing action isn't simply restoring health, it's simultaneously turning the character back into a threat. And then you add Wordmaker's Helm. The character he affects gets another heal at the start of their next turn. Baldur can even heal a friendly character who's already at full health, already rating for that damage they're going to take. And so that second part is important because it means the ability isn't completely wasted just because someone hasn't taken damage yet. And that's exactly the sort of character that scales well conceptually with legendary events. One commenter summed him up beautifully. He tanks, heals, attacks, buffs, and his heal repeats next turn. And that's a pretty compelling job description. So Baldur takes number 6. At number 5, we have an old legendary event favourite, Angrax. And of all the characters in this video, Angrax might be the easiest one to demonstrate visually. You stick him next to a spawn point, and he just starts slapping people. His passive attacks any enemies that moves from a hex adjacent to him, dealing 2 hits of power damage. Combine that with Deep Strike and Terminator armor, and you have a character practically designed to plant himself somewhere extremely inconvenient and refuse to leave. At lower and middle legendary event stages, this can be absolutely disgusting. Enemies arrive, Angrax hits them, they die, the next one arrives, he hits them again, and they're all dead. And you begin questioning whether anybody else on your teams actually needs to turn up. But there's also a really good counter argument in the comments, and this is also what I feel. Eventually you reach a level where Angrax stops killing them with those free attacks. And once that happens, his value drops dramatically. Instead of deleting enemies as they move past him, he's now just stood there annoying them. And that's why I wouldn't put him in the absolute top tier. But across the whole legendary event experience, Angrax absolutely deserves to be in this conversation, and so he's your number 5. At number 4, it's Abaddon, and this one became less about whether Abaddon is good and more about whether Abaddon's now replaced Maladus, and that's a much harder question. Abaddon has a range 2 bolter attack as well as his 5-hit power melee attack, immediately giving him more flexibility than Maladus. His passive also buffs the damage of other chaos characters within 2 hexes, with that bonus increasing based on the attacks Abaddon has performed during the battle. And then we get to his relic. The Talon of Horus adds 3 power hits of damage against enemies positioned adjacent to both Abaddon and his melee target, and so suddenly Abaddon also isn't just hitting one enemy, he's carving through groups of them. His active can also set him to a defined amount of health before immediately making a melee attack, effectively giving him an emergency recovery when he's been beaten down. And again, that's a fantastic legendary event package. But I do want to defend Maladus here slightly. One commenter has both characters at the same D3 mythic investment and pointed out that Maladus just has a substantial amount more armor. Another comment about Maladus and Rotbone's Contagions of Nurgle interaction picked up more support than any other character argument underneath the video. So I'm not ready to declare Maladus dead yet, but I absolutely underestimated what a modern Abaddon can bring to a legendary event. At number 3, it's Titus, and this actually might be my favourite community argument from the whole discussion, because Titus isn't here because he's the best healer, or the best tank, or the best summoner. He's here because he can look at a legendary event stage that he's absolutely no business surviving and just refuse to die. And multiple people brought this up. One commenter said that Titus was always their number 1 pick because his self-revive lets him push further than he normally could. Another said that he can solo content above his weight class without needing to be babysat. But there's an important detail here for you. Titus doesn't simply resurrect forever automatically. He has final vengeance, and the first time each turn turn that he kills an enemy with an attack triggered by Final Vengeance, he's immediately revived with health. So there is a condition, but in a legendary event when there's usually plenty of enemies around him, that's a pretty useful condition to have. His normal melee attack is 4 hits of chain damage, and depending on how his active is used, he can also hit all adjacent enemies with chain damage. But what really sells Titus to me is the return on investment. One comment described a Gold 1 Titus solo carrying chain tracks through stage 8, and somebody else referenced an old example of Silver 1 Titus apparently pushing all the way to stage 9, and that's ridiculously efficient. And so it puts Titus in at number 3. At number 2, Tangida, and this is one where I genuinely looked back at my original list and thought, how did I manage to leave him out? Because I use him, I know how good he is, and he just wasn't there. Tangida can switch his Protector and Conqueror imperatives every turn. Protector gives extra armor to Tangida and adjacent friendly mechanical characters, while Conqueror increases their damage against enemies with reduced armor. And he can switch the imperative and still attack afterwards. But for legendary events, Control Edict is the really important part for him. While Protector Imperative is active, after Tangida attacks, he can summon a Skitarii Vanguard into a free adjacent hex up to his summon limit. Not once per battle, repeatedly, and that's the difference. Every new Vanguard is damage, another body, it's another enemy attack that might not be hitting one of your actual characters, and if they die, you make another one. And one of you has Tangida at Diamond 3 and said he can practically solo up to Battle 12 with his Skitarii. I would definitely back that up. I've used him in exceptionally tough battles and he just keeps on going. Another made the point that Tan is already part of a raid investment team for many players, so leveling him isn't just spending resources for legendary events. And I think that investment efficiency matters. In fact, when I replied to the comments, I said Tangida should probably have been equal 10th with Carrion, but after going through all this again, maybe that was even still underselling him. So Tangida's number 2, which leaves 1, and this one isn't even close. Number 1 is Typhus, and yes, you got me, this is the character I most clearly missed. Specifically, it's Mythic Titus with Lacrimae, his relic, because without the relic, I don't think we're having the same conversation. I've played him a lot, and he always felt a little bit meh to me, but with it, he's completely different. Typhus already has an excellent legendary event profile. His melee attack has got a hit of power damage, ranged attack is one of psychic damage, he has Psyker, Resilient, Terminator armor, and Contagions of Nurgle. And that means he can potentially qualify for some extremely valuable legendary event restrictions, including max 1 hit, power, psychic, and psyker. But Lacrimae is what sends him over the top, because his normal melee attack creates contamination, and during Typhus's turn, when a non-mechanical enemy dies inside his contagion aura, he summons a Poxwalker onto that hex, provided that there are currently fewer than 3 friendly Poxwalkers on the battlefield. And I want to correct something from the discussion here. That doesn't mean that Typhus simply creates 3 Poxwalkers every turn regardless. The limit is 3 on the battlefield, but as they die, Typhus can replace them again and again. And in a legendary event, that's a potential endless conveyor belt of horrible diseased meat shield. Every Poxwalker taking an attack is an attack that isn't aimed at Typhus, Rotbone, Maladus, or whoever you're desperately trying to keep alive. And against non-mechanical enemies, surviving Poxwalkers have the potential to snowball even further. They kill them, and then they create another one. And of course, on top of that, Typhus still has his psychic AoE capability for those moments when ranged enemies have started accumulating around the board. And this wasn't a random nomination either. People were really clear where Typhus was, and they called him a better Snotflogger, and so stuck him in number 5. One commenter went as far as saying Relic's Typhus is as good as Revas. I'm not convinced about that, but Reddit made the same argument. And there's one final reason that this hurts. I have Typhus, I know what his relic does, I just hadn't used him in the most recent legendary event and basically forgot about it. So yes, sometimes the comments are right, not often, let's not get carried away, but this time, Typhus absolutely should have been in my original top 10, and he's comfortably number 1 on the list of characters I missed. So there we have it. 10 characters you thought I overlooked, and there are still even more I could have added. Anufet is definitely one that will raise in rankings once he gets his relic as well, but looking at how slow that crusade is going, I don't think any of us are going to have it until next year. But there's another question we haven't answered. If these characters should have been in my top 10, who comes out? And after reading your comments, there's definitely a few members of my original list that's starting to look nervous. Snotflogger took an absolute beating, rightfully so. Quite a few of you questioned Dreer, although he's still my favourite character in there personally. And then there's a genuine Abaddon versus Maladis debate. Putting Isabella at number 2 was enough to start another crusade, but I still think that she's worth that place. So let me know what you think. If I rebuilt my top 10 today, who gets kicked out, who replaces them, and who am I still missing? Because after making 2 videos about this now, there's one thing I'm certain of. Trying to rank legendary event characters is a terrible idea. But I'll see you in the next video.